And today you have a mix of, a few of us are social workers. We have a few art therapists in the mix, and counselors. And we are all working with a program called Intensive Family Support Services. Now, Intensive Family Support Services is a state-funded program, and we provide individual counseling, educational, psychoeducational workshops, support groups, and different programs and events for family members of people who are living with mental illness. And we're really, we're available at any time. Our services are free. And this is part of what we do, is we like to provide education in the community about mental health and wellness. And so I'm just gonna we'll start with Brianne. I'd like everybody to just introduce themselves real briefly so you know who we are before we jump into our presentation today.
Hi, I'm Brianne Glagowski. I'm a licensed social worker, and I'm one of the family support counselors with our IFSS and our Project First programs at the MHA.
Hi, I'm Linda Hollander. I'm a MSW student finishing up my internship at MHA, and I'm an IFSS counselor.
Mel?
Hi, I'm Melbourne Bryan. I'm with Project First, IFSS. I'm a counselor here.
Yes, and I'll just say Project First offers acute care support for family members. So if you have a loved one in crisis and they, God forbid, have to go to an ER or local hospital, we have counselors specifically for that purpose to give you support during that and kind of walk you through that crisis situation. Sharon?
Yes, my name is Sharon Shur, and I am at my last internship for art therapy and counseling at Caldwell University. Renee is my supervisor, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. And Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Sepulkoski. I'm a counselor and art therapist with the Montclair Child Development Center. Yeah.
And Laura's going to lead us in a nice mindfulness exercise at the end of our presentation. So what I'll do now, everybody, is I'm going to share my screen and we'll just launch right in to our presentation. Bear with me 1 second, please. There we go. So again, we are from Mental Health Association of Essex and Morris. And aside, so one of the reasons we wanted to have this presentation for you is we know that, we initially thought we would have 2 weeks of stay-at-home precautions because of the COVID-19 outbreak. And Claudine and I were talking, just as we signed on this morning, that, wow, this has become now 6 months. So we've all been hearing a lot about personal protective equipment. And our job today is we'd like to sort of bring you up to speed with some emotional protective equipment, something that's going to help you cope with tips for, adjusting to change and uncertainty. Many of you are parents. We know that this is the beginning of the school year. What does this mean to go back to school during a global pandemic? Also, how do you talk to your children about some of these difficult topics? There's a lot going on in our community, in the country right now. And we know that our children are very savvy, and there's a lot going on. You can be sure, even if your child may not explicitly say something to you, you can be sure that they're aware, much more aware than you realize. And so we want to help facilitate your communication with your child. We want to talk about conditions that might promote resilience. We want to encourage you to use mindfulness and share some coping skills on managing some of the difficult feelings like fear, anxiety, anger, grief, loss, and uncertainty. All of these feelings are coming up pretty much for everyone these days, and also the importance of self-care.
So we know you guys might have some questions about this topic. So we are asking that for right now and throughout the presentation that you use your chat button at the bottom of the screen to just type in any questions that you might have. We're going to monitor it throughout the presentation. So if we don't get to a question that you have during this presentation, we're going to have some time at the end to answer any questions. So some concerns that you guys might have are, how can I protect my child's personal health, their mental health, and their safety? How can I best teach my child to follow the guidelines that are outlined? What if the other students, teachers, or staff at my child's school do not follow the guidelines? What communication tools can teach my child to make them feel safe to discuss their concerns? And with so many unknown factors, how can I manage my own and my child's discomfort? So these are just some questions that throughout this presentation we are going to address. So
you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, we know most of us dislike change. As we acknowledge that change is inevitable part of life, we learn new skills, we learn to cope with new challenges, and this helps us build resilience. And resilience is something that can be learned. So we want to remember to be patient with ourselves and others within our community, such as teachers, our classmates, and of course our children, because adapting to change can take a lot of time. So we want to set realistic expectations for ourselves and our children. Remember that stress can put us in flight or fight mode. We want to promote connection within our families, and remember that we're all in this together. It is restorative.
So, one of the things we know about COVID-19, there's been a recent study that shows that the pandemic actually is creating preconditions for stress and even for trauma. So the lack of predictability that we're experiencing, immobility, not being able to go outside, not being able to go to places that we typically would go, having a loss of connection, and trying to figure out how are we going to rebuild those connections. We are wired as human beings to really thrive in connection. And so this has been very disrupting for all of us. Numbing out and spacing out. I know, how many of us have been binging on Netflix? Raise your hand. Or, at the Mental Health Association, we may hear of people using unhealthy coping skills, or maybe you'll see this in your children. Think about some behaviors that you've been witnessing in your children or your teens. Are they spending a lot of time on the computer? Are they, doing a lot of gaming? So this is a way that people deal with stress, but may not be that helpful. We are certainly experiencing a loss of sense of time and sequences. I can't tell you how many times, we have to refer to the calendar a little bit more often because our daily schedule, those of us who are working remotely or may have had our employment disrupted, or may have been doing summer camp remotely with their children, this can be very disorienting and disruptive. A loss of safety. The pandemic itself is making us think about mortality and about wellness and health in a much different way than we've ever had to before. There may be those among us who have lost a loved one or a neighbor or a friend or a coworker to COVID-19. And also losing a sense of purpose. If your employment has been disrupted, or anything that changes or disorients us is going to make us think about, gee, what is the purpose of all this? And if your community connections are disrupted, how can I contribute to the community? How can I stay connected? So all of these conditions are things that create trauma, and guess what? We are all experiencing that. So we'd like to remind people to be self-aware that we are all going through extraordinary stress, and it really helps to identify actions that we can take every day to restore and maintain wellness. Because when you're feeling helpless and uncertain, if you can take concrete actions, even small ones, it helps you have more of a sense of control and structure. We'd also like to remind you that children and adolescents likely express stress differently than adults. And any of the IFSS team, please be sure to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm going to do that right now.
Excellent.
Just as Renee said, children express stress differently, and we're going to talk about some ways that children express stress across different age groups. So it's important to remember that children and teens express stress by being nervous, anxious. They could be clingy or demanding. They may be frightened when returning to school, and we understand now that most of the kids are going to be learning remotely, so that might not apply at the moment. But still be aware if you notice your child or teen becomes withdrawn or upset, as regression can be a common response to stress. You should find positive ways for your children and teens to express and communicate their negative feelings in a safe, supportive environment. And one of the things we talked about yesterday is, well, how would you do that? One place actually is during mealtime. So it might be good during mealtime to actually sit down and talk about some of their feelings where you're all together. So if it helps if adults are able to manage their own emotions by remaining calm, listening to their children and teens' concerns, speaking kindly and reassuring. You need to manage your own stress, which helps you support your child. And remember, self-care isn't selfish.
And, you know, Linda, as you're talking, it's making me think, you know, it's easier said than done, right? Like, we're humans too. Just because you're an adult doesn't necessarily mean, you know, you can just manage your own emotions easily or reduce your stress. I think, if anything, the parents are feeling more stress. You may be more exposed to the news or different things like that. And so, again, we always say, we emphasize again and again, self-care isn't selfish. You put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on someone else.
We're going to share with you two quotes that we think are pertinent during this time. So every time you think of calling your child attention seeking this year, consider changing and reframing it to connection seeking and see how your perspective changes. And the other quote we like you to think about is, our brains are wired for connection, but trauma rewires them for protection.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we start? Now, it's good to start with ourselves. Manage your own anxiety as the starting point. Start from a place of feeling grounded. Identify what has worked for you in the past when you have been under stress. Identify your strengths. And at this point, I'd like you to put in any of your strengths that we can deal with them a bit later on. Engage in self-care practices.
Yeah, so as Mel was saying, for those of you who feel comfortable using the chat format, if you could just type in, you know, what is your strength? Think about what has given you strength in the past and just jot down an example. And since I can't see the chat, are we getting any responses? I'm very eager to know. If
Not yet.
Not yet? Any of the IFSS team, can you put in what one of your strengths may be? What are examples? Maybe sometimes it's hard to identify. What's an example of a strength?
So Lindsay says being a flexible thinker.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Psychological flexibility is actually one of the conditions of resilience. It can really help us be resilient.
And Laura said being creative.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Frank said self-reflection.
Self-reflection, being creative, and having flexibility. Okay, feel free to continue to reflect on that, and focusing on strengths can be really powerful thing.
So we just wanted to include this image because a lot of our stress and anxiety right now can be caused by how much of what is out of our control during this time. So this is just a little helpful handout. We can see some of the things that are in our control, such as if we have a tendency to watch the news a lot or read the newspaper, there can be a lot of negative news and it changes every day. So sometimes we might just have to turn off the news. Limiting what we see on social media, you know, how we are controlling our own social distance, our own wearing of masks, our own attitude. But the things that we can't control, which we kind of have to try to work on letting go of as much as we can, is the actions of other people or how long this will last. We all were saying how we thought it was going to be 2 weeks, and now look where we are now. So we really have no control over how long it's going to last. So putting all of our focus on what we can control can help kind of alleviate some of our anxious feelings and stress.
So now I just want to go through some practical tips for the parents. So using mindfulness and self-compassion is a way to help prevent from numbing out. Overcoming unpredictability by managing your daily schedule, so setting up routines, exercising, going for walks, practicing yoga, tai chi, or deep breathing are all different forms of self-care that you guys can use. Using technology to socialize remotely, eating meals together, playing games with your family. Another tip is to familiarize yourself with updated school guidelines once that does start happening and the opening plan comes. Identifying practices that make you and your child feel secure, like having individual supplies, your own hand sanitizer, your own mask, and controlling your own anxiety because anxiety can be contagious to your children. Ways to control your anxiety may include getting credible information about the virus so that you are aware, talking to supportive family and friends, and taking care of your own physical health.
Mm-hmm. You know, and to this point, how many of you have kind of gone over some of these practices with your child? We find that a lot of times if you can model things, like model how to put the mask on, take it off, how to use a sanitizer, how to, you know, some of the different practical things and concrete actions to model it and go through it with your child can really give them a sense of control and safety. Safety is like a number one issue that's on everybody's minds.
So one thing I just thought of too was coming up with different greetings that you can practice with your kids.
Oh.
So when they do see friends or family, they can have a new greeting that they're ready to go with.
Yeah. Sort of like air hugs.
Like
I remember we
elbows.
used to do air hugs or elbows.
Elbows, yeah.
The other thing that came up for me during this slide, and I'm sorry, I'm just interjecting, is that idea of self-compassion. So is this term a foreign term or a new term for people is a question that I have. Self-compassion, meaning if you are feeling anxious or if you're feeling stressed, or maybe, I mean, I know as a parent of 3, you know, if you're stressed and maybe you become irritable towards your child, can you be compassionate towards yourself and sort of step back and be patient and realize, hey, you know, I'm going through this too. Take a breath. It will help you to function better and to be at your best with your child.
So we're living in an ever-changing world and environment. So we want to give you some tips for adjusting to change and reconnecting with your sense of meaning and purpose. Consider this a prime moment to revisit the satisfying aspects of your life and actively engage with them. And how would you do that? Let yourself think of happy experiences and even make a list as a concrete reminder of what motivates you. Connecting with your faith-based community is a good way to do this. Engaging with a social justice issue you care about, helping a neighbor with shopping or chores, and again, reaching out to family and friends remotely. Having the connection and having a really good support system will definitely help you get through these times.
Yeah. And, you know, before folks came on today, we were talking to Claudine about what are our happy places. And if anybody, I sort of want to invite people as well to use the chat. As Linda was saying, let yourself savor thoughts of happy experiences. If you have a happy place or a place or an activity that helps you feel refueled or motivated or encouraged during these times, please feel free to just jot it in the chat, because it may inspire others in the group. And it's also good to sort of concretize that and remember that and remind yourself of that.
Adapting to changing family and household dynamics as school begins. Family members will have many questions. I'm sorry. Engage conversations in an open and honest way to show support and kindness. Be mindful of current news topics that your children will encounter: coronavirus, social and racial justice. You know, some of the news that we do hear have, you know, they all have negative and positive components. And it's good for you to ask your child if they understand what they're watching and what they're hearing, and you can possibly explain things to them better. To manage stress, limit news exposure. This will help your child to feel much more comfortable. When you show willingness to talk about difficult topics, you're expressing confidence in your child that they will survive through challenges, and these challenges may be many. Being overly protective or shying away from uncomfortable topics send the opposite message. Be curious and responsive rather than reactive. Have your own source of support, someone you can talk to about your own worries and concerns.
So when you're actually going to have these conversations with your child or teen, remember that a child who's in kindergarten, you wouldn't speak to them the same way you would talk to someone who's in high school. So we just want to remind you to be mindful to use words, phrases, and examples that are age appropriate. Children and teens, no matter what their age, want to know some basic questions. Am I safe? Are you, the people who are caring for me, are you safe? How will this affect my daily life? And as we've been saying all along, focus on fact-based information. Empower your child by helping them focus on what they can control.
Talking with your children about returning to school. What will school look like? Review the rules with your child to keep them safe. Empower your child to ask questions. And there's no wrong question to ask, especially during this pandemic. What do you do if other children are not following the rules? And sometimes the children will notice that you may have one or two other children in the class not wearing a mask. There is always an answer to that. They're not wearing a mask because they may have some respiratory problems, and wearing the mask can compound these issues for them. So they make other little guidelines for these children. Educate your child about possible exceptions to the rules. Take the cue from the child. Be reassuring.
Yes. And we also learned that the hybrid opening in Verona in particular, it looks like it's been delayed a little bit, so that I think many of you all are going to be coping with in-home instruction, homeschooling once again, like just before the summer. And so I imagine, you know, that you may be coping with disappointment, again, having to figure out how to maintain that structure and that schedule at home during the day. And we know that what we found in talking to families is that if a family is able to keep a daily schedule, they actually seem to fare a little bit more comfortably than a family that sort of lets things go. So we really recommend and encourage that you keep a little schedule, even if it it doesn't have to be really strict and restrictive. You want it to be realistic, but at least have some sort of, even a soft schedule. You know, wake up at regular times during the school week, have meals at regular times during the school week, allot certain hours of the day so that there's some consistency. Having that consistency, and I think Laura may talk about it later in the presentation too, is very reassuring and gives a sense of stability.
So I know, like Renee said, a lot of the learning right now is remote for the Verona School District, but some practical tips for your kids when they do go back to school is to reinforce everyday COVID-19 precautions. This can be done by preparing your kids for a school day by having them wear a mask around the house for longer periods, teaching them to use a song during hand washing, like singing happy birthday twice while washing their hands, practicing social distance in the home to have them adjust, and reminding your kids not to share food, drinks, pens, or notebooks, even with friends. I did include this meme that I had found that I thought was really relevant to this. And it says, this mask isn't, oh, I can't really, hold on, sorry. This mask isn't the one you wore to school this morning. And then the child says, no, this one was way cooler. I traded mine with Taylor, who traded with Hunter. And I think that's really relevant to reinforce to your kids that even though they are your friends, you know, your mask is your mask, and there are safety precautions that we have to follow. So I think that was relevant, the meme. And then before going back to school, I also think it's important to have your child get a wellness checkup just to ensure their physical well-being.
Now we're going to look at some questions that you can actually ask your child to have some of this dialogue. You can ask them, what have they actually heard about the coronavirus? And where did they hear about it? What are their major concerns or worries? Do they have any questions that you as parents can help them with? How are they feeling about coronavirus and eventually going back to school? Or if they're not going back to school, you can change that question to, how are you going to handle and dealing with distance learning with your friends, about sitting in front of the computer? What do you know about the school guidelines? And what questions do you have about them? And I think we also wanted to take this time for the participants to put in the chat room any questions that you think you could be asking your child, or maybe questions they have already asked you.
Any questions at this point?
None in the chat yet, but
Okay.
we'll still monitor it. So if you guys have any questions throughout, just feel free to put them in.
Okay. I think essentially the key here is encourage your child to ask questions, and for you yourself to ask questions. And we want to kind of remind parents that, you don't have to have the answers right away. It's okay. I think sometimes we're afraid to talk about difficult topics because we think that we may need to have the answers. But children really respond to honesty. And so if you can just honestly say, I may not, that's a great question. Let's figure out the answer together, or let's do a little research on that. That way you are modeling to your child that it's okay to not have every answer, and also showing them, empowering them how to come up with answers to their own questions. Okay.
So reflective listening is a good technique to use when you're having these conversations with your children or with your teens. It's an active listening skill, and it involves verbal and nonverbal cues. It can involve when you're hearing a response from your child or they're answering a question, kind of summarizing what you think you heard them say by using phrases like, oh, it sounds like you're very upset about this situation, or it seems as if you're having a hard time. I get a feeling that, this is really difficult. You want to ensure that what you heard is actually what they meant. And you can even say, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what it sounds like. We just want to really validate what they're feeling. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing with it or giving in necessarily, depending on what it is, but you just want to really validate it. It just means that you're listening to their thoughts and that they are important.
Yes. And, as Laura was saying, validation is so important, because during a time when we may feel disconnected or isolated, a protective factor is feeling connected. So what is a better way to feel connected than to feel heard? And what is a better way to feel connected than to feel understood, you know, or to know that someone is at least trying to understand you. So that's why reflective listening is so important and so can be so powerful. And now this slide is just a few healthy ways to communicate, a few more tips that are, you know, for example, reflect back what is being said. What I heard you say was, you know, using your child's words rather than your own words, beginning where your child is, not necessarily where you want them to be. You know, oh, I'm so disappointed we're not going to be able to start school. I don't think I could take this anymore. Then you might want to just really, rather than being reactive, oh, of course you can handle it. You want to start where they're at and say, wow, you know, it sounds like, you know, you're really disappointed. I can see you're really disappointed. And start there so that at least they know you heard them. Curiosity is a great tool. Being curious and open to what your child has to say rather than having preconceived notions. And one great way to kind of encourage your child to learn more about what's going on with them is simply saying, hey, tell me more about what you meant by that. Or I'd love to hear more about that. Or can you help me understand that? So some of these simple prompts can really help us as parents get to know more about what our child may be thinking or feeling. And remember, you know, for those of you whose children may be feeling stress or anxiety, and you know that they are feeling stress and anxiety, one very good antidote for stress. And as art therapists, some of us who are art therapists, we have a saying, better out than in. So it's good. We really encourage the expression of emotion. It's healthy to get those feelings out. And if you can let your child know, hey, I'm up for it. I can hear what you're going through. There's space for it. That can go a long way in reducing stress, reducing anxiety, and giving some sense of relief to your child. Notice what they're saying and what they're not saying. So here we're really pointing out the importance of nonverbal communication, your child's body language, the eye contact that they make, their posture, their energy levels. And these are things I think as parents, you're very attuned to, but may not always be conscious of. So we sort of want to bring that into your self-awareness to just be paying attention to that and noticing it. Sometimes it's less about, oh, I got to rush in and fix this and make it all better. The step one is let me notice what's happening. Take a breath, take a step back, and just be aware of it. And then responding in a thoughtful way rather than a reactive way. Let your child know, you know, that you can emotionally relate to how they're feeling. Be honest and authentic about how you're feeling in an age-appropriate way. So again, this slide is really about self-awareness, self-reflection, self-care. All of those things, they're sort of a triad that helps you be better equipped to have difficult, you know, conversations with your child about some of the difficult topics that may come up. One of the, you know, we wanted to mention this, that a social byproduct of the pandemic has actually been bringing to light some existing social and racial inequities and injustices that have come to light. So we wanted to point out, you know, parents need to be aware that their children are exposed to this. They may be even more aware or more in touch with some of these trends through social media and are likely feeling the impact. We've also noticed at the Mental Health Association that there has been a rise in physical and verbal assault, as well as bullying behavior towards Asian American students or students who appear Asian here in our own communities. So it's something, you know, you may want to have a conversation or check in with your children and see what their awareness of that is. And with the different protests that have been going on, children and teens, they may feel fearful about it And on the other end of the spectrum, you know, we've had some older children and adolescents feel like they want to go out and march, or they want to be in some of the protests. So these are things just to be aware of, and to have, certainly you want to have conversations with your children about it. And why are we talking about racial injustice as the Mental Health Association? Isn't that more political, or is it really mental health? And we would say, actually, it's mental health. It's a mental health issue because it can lead to bullying. And we know that bullying has a lasting negative effect on a child's self-esteem, their level of functioning, their mental and physical health. Assigning blame to a group of people can promote racial bias and creates conditions for bullying. And again, you know, just a reminder to all of us to respond rather than be reactive. You want to use mindful reflection and inquiry. You want to use be curious, try to be objective. One way to address some of the social issues and unrest is, you know, stay current with what's going on, stick to objective facts, just as you're making effort to stick to objective facts about the pandemic. You want to go to reliable sources. You want to fact check when you're discussing topics with your children. And, you know, sometimes online museums we found are great resources for educational information. There are different classes and workshops that are being offered, and we do have, at the end of the presentation, we included some links of different online educational resources that you can access. Watch a documentary, those types of things. And again, you know, be self-reflective, practice self-awareness of your own thoughts and biases and experiences, and see, you know, notice how they influence your own language and behavior in interacting with your children.
So we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we're all experiencing a lot of loss right now, whether it be with social gatherings looking different. Sports are definitely not, you know, how we expected them to be or what we're used to. Not missing out on celebrations, birthdays, seeing certain family members. Vacations look different this summer. Our kids wanting to see, you know, their friends, and that doesn't always happen or can't happen. And like we mentioned earlier, that sense of safety and just the loss of the way things were. Things are definitely not how they were this time last year. So we want to make sure we acknowledge it in ourselves, but also in our children and our teens when they're feeling sad. We want to give them space to talk about their feelings, you know, a safe space like we mentioned earlier, a time. We want to promote emotional literacy. I know we have a handout about owning our feelings for later that we'll provide. So that can be really important to kind of give them the language that they want to talk about their own emotions and be honest and reflective about our own experience with loss so they can feel more comfortable doing that for themselves. It can be helpful to watch a movie or read a book about loss to kind of start the conversation, make it more objective. Using arts, like Renee had mentioned, I'm an art therapist as well, and we want to put it out more than in. So using the art, music, creative writing to kind of express some of those emotions that we're feeling. Research does support this. We want to have a moment of silence for people who we have lost, whether by lighting a candle or making up our own ritual that fits for us, and asking our children, what do they need to feel better? What would be helpful for them in this moment? You know, we want to listen without trying to fix things. Sometimes they just need someone to hear them out. And this is just some tips about communicating with our children. So we talked a lot about how important connection is right now. So these are just some ways that we can really promote that connection, using daily check-ins. So that can be helpful, I feel, with including in our daily schedule or our daily ritual. A lot of times with younger kids, some of the kids I worked with, I encourage families to kind of create even their own like feelings chart so they can better understand their own feelings, and we can kind of give them more of a language. Again, we talked about validation a lot, really validating what they're saying to us and acknowledging their feelings. Practicing bravery for some of our children who are a little more wary about returning to school or even kind of going out in the world for a walk or seeing their friends. If we can take small steps with them, seeing what they're comfortable with, like, oh, come with me to walk to the mailbox or something like that, we can just kind of encourage that bravery and even that resilience in them. include those, maybe with our older teens, include them in some kind of decision making with regards to school. Sometimes they have the option, if they can at least voice their opinions about what they are comfortable with, it can be helpful, again, just to have them be heard. And sharing our own feelings in a way that doesn't overwhelm them, so they can, again, hear us being honest and authentic. And just being mindful of our tone. So how we're expressing our feelings, how we're expressing our thoughts on everything that's going on, our tone can make a big difference.
So one of the things we talk about is relationships, and we're going to be all adapting to new relationship dynamics with your children's teachers and the school staff. And being remote, this is going to be even more challenging. I don't know how many of you know your children's teachers, have ever met them before, but these are some things that you can think about: being self-aware, practicing self-care, and managing your own stress level. You want to think long-term and let your encounters with teachers and staff be relationship-driven. Use reflective listening, which is kind of what we talked about before, and validate the emotions of others. So I think maybe Laura, you're going to give us an example of reflective listening and how to validate.
Sure. So if, a child comes up to you and just says, I'm so fed up with having to stay home all the time. I can't stand being at I can't stand doing schoolwork from the computer all day long. I want to get out of the house.
Yeah. So what I heard you say is that, you can't stand being at your computer all day and that you really want to get out of the house. It could be as simple as that, just using your child's words, starting out with, I heard you say, whatever that was. And it can be enough, it can be very comforting and reassuring to know that you were heard. Rather than trying to quash it, you want to give a little space for that so that, it can be seen and heard, and that your child can feel a sense of relief.
Yeah. Sometimes I've heard, when children or older kids or anyone complains or expresses frustration, a lot of times we have a tendency to say, oh, it's not so bad, it's going to be okay. But that can kind of shut down exactly what they're expressing and make them feel completely unvalidated. So it's kind of just checking our language and what we're not reacting to, but responding to.
Yes. And I think for parents, sometimes, we feel our children's discomfort so keenly. And so we have that sort of natural instinct to make it better. So it could feel a little counterintuitive, but we have found that it can actually be helpful in the long run.
And one of the other things we want to talk about is taking things personally. Of course, when it comes to your children, we all take things personally, but when you're speaking to teachers and school staff, remember that they're following specific guidelines. So it's important that you as parents refer to the school guidelines and understand what they are, rather than take personal opinions.
A few points to remember. Remember, we're all going through extraordinary stress and experiencing levels of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, and reactions to change. This is a new norm for us at this time. We're all adapting to all these changes. So devote energy to the things within your control. You can never be wrong by being supportive, empathic, and reflective, even if it may take more than one attempt. A long-term relationship-focused perspective may be helpful rather than focusing on a single conversation, moment, or encounter. Take time for self-care. When you are at your best, you have increased capacity to cope.
So we also just wanted to, before we go into our exercise, our mindfulness exercise, we wanted to talk about the effects of taking a single deep breath. So your breath is your body's built-in stress reliever. Deep breathing has multiple health benefits, which include reducing the production of the cortisol hormone, lowering blood pressure and heart rate, stimulating lymphatic system. Mindfulness activities also increase the immune system function, increase the quality of attention, heighten feelings of empathy, and increase the ability to tolerate discomfort. And for the mindfulness activities, there's also a handout that should be included that has a list of a cross age guide of mindfulness activities. So I know we don't have a ton of time, but I'll briefly, walk us through a quick little meditation. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If not, it's okay. We're just gonna take some time to focus on our breath. So do 5 rounds of practice where you breathe in through your nose, counting to 4, then hold it for 4, and then release it for 4. If you can hold it for longer, you can do that. Just take time to bring your breath slowly down and bring all your focus onto it. Notice how your body feels as you're focusing on your breath. If your mind begins to stray, briefly bring it back to your breath. Take this time to think of a place where you feel your safest and your calmest. This may look like a garden full of lush greenery with a light breeze. It may also look like a day at the beach with water rolling onto the sand. It may include being in nature or include being at home. Take a few moments to stay in this place, picturing what's there, what's needed, and remain focused on your breath. When you are ready, you can open your eyes and return to your normal breathing pattern. I know it's really quick, but I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
So we just want to thank you guys, and this is a list of the resources and links we used to create this presentation. It does have extra resources that you can use for yourself or for your kids, some activities, so you can take a look at that. And I think we have a list of who's here and we can send them.
Yeah, we'll send that out to Claudine to distribute. There's some wonderful websites. This particular one, Montclair Bounce Resilience Resources, is updated periodically with events, online events and classes and things within the community that focus on building resilience. So that can be really, really helpful.
If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our director, Marvin Gorski, Renee Folzen-Logan, Brian Glogowski, and myself. The library will have our main number and the extension that you can reach to us at any time. Please feel free to do so.
Yes. So I stopped my sharing at the moment because I thought it might be, we have 5 minutes or more, and I thought this might be a time where if people have questions, comments, thoughts, if you raise your hand, if we can see you, or if you could either put it in the chat, or if you raise your hand and we'll call on you and we can talk about it. I'm not sure if there were any comments or questions about the material we covered, something that we didn't cover that you were really hoping that we would address. Speak now. Let us know if there's anything. Something I noticed was I realized as we were going through it, we did spend a lot of time talking about parents and your own sort of mental health and wellness. Did anybody else notice that? And I was wondering how people reacted to that. Oh, let's see, do we have a fact sheet with all free services for families? Yes, and I can send that to Claudine.
So I will make a copy of this recording available on the library's website, and any resources you'd like to share, I can also put up on our website, and then also distribute to anybody who signed up for this program. I have their email addresses, so I can send that out as well.
Beautiful. So we sort of have a little tradition in our mental health, in our intensive family support services groups, at least I like to do it, is we do something called a one-word wrap-up, where everybody kind of goes around and calls out a word that expresses your experience today with this workshop. Any takeaway, anything from what we talked about today. So I'm wondering if you are all up for that, we could do it, and I could start it off and sort of, we can pass the ball around. Shall we?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll start, and the word that comes up for me is connection. And I'll pass the ball to Laura.
Mine was connection too.
It's okay, we can have the same word.
Brianne.
I'm gonna say informed, more informed. I'll pass it to Linda.
My word is hopeful, and I'll pass it to Mel.
Mine is communication. And we can pass this to Sharon.
Mine is hope, but I was also thinking, I just heard, yes, there's word listen and silent is the same letters. So it's very relevant to what we were talking about. So listening and being silent is kind of one and the same.
Wow, 2 for 1, 2 for 1.
I'll pass it to Frank.
I would say communication also, but I would also say collaboration.
Ah, beautiful, thank you. Collaboration and communication. Can you pass it to someone? We've got Verona Library, we've got Claudine, Verona Library, and S. Kelsey.
S. Lakowski.
I would say hope as well.
Beautiful.
Yes. And I thank you all for doing this today.
Oh, thank you. We're all figuring out how to do all of this remotely. So if there were any little hiccups with the Zoom, I apologize. I might have been floundering a little, but hopefully it was okay.
I'd also like to add to the group that if you need any support with the district's reopening plan, I am the Director of Special Services for Verona Public Schools. So please feel free to email me at fmoriello@veronaschools.org. Even if you're dealing with a family and you just need clarity to help support them, please feel free to reach out. I'm here to support everyone in the community also.
That's wonderful to know. Thank you. Ms. LaKelsey, could you pass the ball to Claudine?
I think I'm the only one left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Verona Library. Catherine doesn't have audio, so she won't participate.
Okay. Bring us home, Claudine.
So no pressure, right? Hope, but then also, connection as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. It's really been wonderful to be here together with everybody, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This was wonderful. And again, I will have a recording of this available. I will have any sort of handouts that you give me available. And then if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I have your contact information. I can also put them in contact with you as well.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Great.
Okay, Great. Laura, if you send me that, your finalized mindfulness PDF, if you send that to me after we close up, then I'll go ahead and send one email over to Claudine with our PDF of the workshop and other handouts that we talked about this afternoon.
Got it.